Stand on the bluff above the Hudson River and look up. Limestone walls glow against the sky. Columns rise on all four sides. Gardens descend in terraces toward the water. Beautiful. Yes. But this house was never just a country retreat. How did one grandson of America's first robber baron build a palace he would occupy only weeks each year while maintaining a staff of 60? What did it cost? Not in dollars, but in the invisible labor that kept chandeliers lit and fires burning before dawn. Who actually paid for this dream? The man who signed the checks, or the workers whose names survive only in payroll ledgers? And when the Vanderbilt fortune that built 40 mansions across America finally crumbled under its own weight, how did this one house, modest by family standards, manage to survive? The mansion stands. The story behind it does not. May 27, 1794, Staten Island, New York. Cornelius Vanderbilt is born to a farmer and boatman whose family lives in poverty at Port Richmond, the fourth of 9 children, no education beyond age 11, but possessed of something his father lacked, an appetite for money so consuming it would reshape American geography itself. At 16, Cornelius borrows $100 from his parents and buys a 2-masted sailing barge, a ferry service between Staten Island and Manhattan. He charges less than competitors, undercuts them, destroys them. By 19, he marries his first cousin and begins building a fleet. The work is brutal. Days on the water in all weather, nights calculating profits, no rest, no mercy for those who stand in his way. By 35, Cornelius owns steamships that dominate coastal routes from New York to California. They call him the Commodore, a title born of his maritime empire, but one that will outlast the ships themselves. The nickname carries weight, respect, fear. When the Commodore speaks, markets shift. When he moves, fortunes collapse. The Commodore does not build mansions. He lives modestly, almost miserably, his fortune growing while his family suffers his contempt. His wife endures a marriage without warmth. His children learn early that affection must be earned through business acumen, and even then it rarely comes. Especially his daughters, whom he considers worthless, burdens, expenses. He keeps few records, managing his vast enterprises inside his own head. Numbers, routes, profits, competitors' weaknesses, all stored in a mind as ruthless as it is brilliant. His office on Bowling Green in Manhattan becomes the nerve center of American commerce. Men wait for hours hoping for an audience. A word from Vanderbilt can make or break a business. He grants interviews rarely. When he does, he speaks in short, brutal sentences. No pleasantries, no waste. Time is money, and he wastes neither. Then, late in life, after the financial panic of 1857, he pivots, railroads, the future. While other men scramble to recover from the crash, Vanderbilt sees opportunity. He begins buying railroad stock, small lines at first, then larger ones, consolidating, eliminating redundancy, creating efficiency through monopoly. By 1867, he controls the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad, one of America's first massive, impersonal corporations. The first great monopoly, no longer a collection of small lines operated by individual owners. Now a unified system stretching from New York to Chicago. Standard gauges, coordinated schedules, freight rates set by one man's office. The scale is unprecedented. The power is intoxicating, and the profits are staggering. By the time Cornelius Vanderbilt dies on January 4th, 1877, at age 82, he has amassed over $100 million, equivalent to roughly $143 billion in today's currency, adjusted for GDP. The richest man in American history at that moment, surpassed only later by Rockefeller and, in our time, by figures like Elon Musk. His death makes headlines across the nation. Not because he was loved, because he was powerful, because his fortune represented something new in America, wealth on a scale that dwarfed old money, that made European aristocrats look provincial. The will is read, the family gathers, the numbers are announced. He leaves $95 million to his eldest son, William Henry Vanderbilt. He leaves $7.5 million to William's 4 sons, Cornelius, William, Frederick, and George. To his wife and 8 daughters, he leaves table scraps, $500,000 each. Enough to live comfortably, perhaps, but a pittance compared to what the sons receive. His contempt for women, consistent throughout life, extends beyond the grave. 3 of his daughters contest the will. They claim their father had delusions, was not in his right mind. The legal battle lasts over a year. It is ugly, public. The family's dirty laundry aired in newspapers, and in the end, the will stands. The daughters lose. One son, Cornelius Jeremiah Vanderbilt, disinherited and humiliated, commits suicide in 1882. The New York Times coins a term for Cornelius in 1859, robber baron, the first American ever called by that name. And the template is set. A self-made man who built transportation infrastructure that connected the nation, yes, but who also bribed officials, crushed competitors without mercy, and extracted wealth from monopolistic positions while giving almost nothing to charity. $1 million to Central University in Nashville, later Vanderbilt University, represents his largest donation, a pittance compared to the fortune itself, a gesture, perhaps, toward legacy, but nothing that would fundamentally change the calculus of his life. His children will build 40 opulent mansions across America. They will throw parties that cost more than working families earn in lifetimes. They will compete with European nobility for social supremacy. They will live lives of such extravagance that within 3 generations, the Vanderbilt fortune, $100 million strong in 1877, will be almost entirely depleted. But in 1877, at the moment of the Commodore's death, the family stands at the peak of American wealth. William Henry Vanderbilt inherits the empire. And unlike his father, William is a capable businessman. He doubles the fortune in just 8 years, expanding the railroad empire his father built. New lines, new consolidations, profits that exceed even the Commodore's wildest projections. When William dies in 1885, he divides his wealth among his 8 children. Each inherits tens of millions, unimaginable sums, life-changing amounts that, paradoxically, will prove to be the family's undoing. One of those children is Frederick William Vanderbilt, 3rd son, quiet, withdrawn, different from his siblings in ways that will define his life. February 2nd, 1856, New Dorp, Staten Island. Frederick William Vanderbilt is born, the 3rd son of William Henry and Maria Louisa Kissam Vanderbilt. He grows up in an era when his grandfather's name appears in newspapers, alongside words like ruthless, unscrupulous, monopolist, robber baron. The family relocates to Manhattan when Frederick is young. They occupy a brownstone, then larger homes as the fortune grows. But the public attention never ceases. Newspaper cartoons depict the Vanderbilts as bloated plutocrats sitting on bags of gold, while workers starve. Editorial writers denounce the family's wealth. Preachers rail against the sin of accumulated riches. For a child growing up in this atmosphere, the weight is immense. Frederick attends private schools. His siblings are boisterous, confident, eager to claim their place in society. Frederick shrinks, becomes quieter, develops a shyness that will follow him throughout life. He attends the Sheffield Scientific School at Yale, the only one of his siblings to graduate from college. Class of 1876. Studies engineering and science. Joins St. Anthony Hall, a secret society. Pays for a new chapter house and dormitory, his first major expenditure of family money. By all accounts, Frederick is different. Where his brothers embrace the spotlight, Frederick shrinks from it. Where his sisters plan elaborate weddings and debut balls, Frederick avoids social events whenever possible. Shy to the point of pathology, awkward, uncomfortable in crowds. Neighbors and employees will later tell stories that border on the absurd. Frederick darting into bushes to avoid meeting a servant on the estate grounds, only to encounter the same servant who had darted into the same bushes out of respect for his employer. Both men hiding from each other in the undergrowth. The story becomes famous in the village of Hyde Park. People laugh about it. But underneath the humor is something sad. A man so uncomfortable with human contact that he literally hides from his own employees. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who will later live near Frederick at Hyde Park, recalls the incident in conversations. He finds it amusing, but also telling. Frederick Vanderbilt is not like other wealthy men of his generation. He does not seek power. He does not crave attention. He wants only to be left alone. In 1878, at age 22, Frederick enters the family railroad business as a clerk. His father insists. All the sons must learn the business from the ground up. Frederick works his way through departments as his father had done. Accounting, operations, freight management, passenger services. He learns the machinery of monopoly capitalism, how rates are set, how competition is eliminated, how politicians are influenced, how fortunes are made. He proves competent, methodical, detail-oriented, not brilliant like his grandfather, but steady, reliable. By the time he is 30, Frederick is a director of multiple railroads. By 40, he oversees operations of 22 railroads, the New York Central, the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie, the Chicago and Northwestern, and more. Also Western Union Telegraph Company, Hudson River Bridge Company, Detroit River Tunnel Company, Niagara River Bridge Company, New York State Realty, and Terminal Company. His wealth grows, methodically, quietly, without fanfare. That same year, December 17, 1878, Frederick marries in secret. The bride, Louise Holmes Anthony Torrance, age 24, daughter of Charles Lee Anthony, a successful dry goods merchant in New York City, operating under the firm name Anthony and Hall. Louise's family has money, not Vanderbilt money, but enough to move in similar circles. She is educated, well-mannered, beautiful. But Louise comes with complications. She had been married before, to Alfred Torrance, Frederick's cousin. Alfred is the grandson of the Commodore through his daughter, Sophia Johnson. The marriage ended in divorce in 1877, scandalous in an era when divorce carried enormous social stigma. 1 year later, Louise marries Frederick, another Vanderbilt, first cousins to each other, these two husbands. The secret wedding generates gossip throughout New York society. Why the secrecy? Why the rush? Is she pregnant? No children ever come? Is the family ashamed? The New York Daily Tribune reports that Frederick's father, William Henry, expressed displeasure. They are debarred of the parental mansion and deprived of the parental blessing. The language is harsh, biblical, almost. But whether William Henry's anger was genuine or merely a performance for public consumption is unclear. Because Frederick's father later bequeaths them his home at 459 Fifth Avenue, a prime Manhattan address. Perhaps the displeasure fades. Perhaps it was never real. Perhaps the secrecy of the wedding was simply Frederick's characteristic desire to avoid public attention. Whatever the reason, Frederick and Louise remain married for nearly 50 years, a rarity in their social circle, where divorce and remarriage become increasingly common. They will never have children, but they will build 5 houses together, 5 monuments to wealth, 5 stages, for a life lived largely offstage. A townhouse in Manhattan, later replaced by the home at 1025 Fifth Avenue, purchased in 1917. Rough Point in Newport, Rhode Island. A 70-room mansion on the cliffs overlooking the Atlantic, built in the most fashionable resort town in America. Pine Tree Point on Upper St. Regis Lake in the Adirondacks, a great camp in the wilderness where wealthy families escaped summer heat. Sonegy at Bar Harbor, Maine, purchased by Louise in 1919 as yet another retreat. And Hyde Park, the country estate on the Hudson River that will outlive them all. By 1895, Frederick oversees operations of 22 railroads. He is 40 years old, wealthy beyond measure, one of the richest men in America, and looking for a retreat, a place where he can escape the expectations that come with the Vanderbilt name, a place where he can pursue his true passion, horticulture, gardens, trees, the careful cultivation of beauty that does not require human interaction. He finds it on the Hudson River, May 1895, the Hudson River Valley. The estate known as Hyde Park goes up for sale. 600 acres on the east bank of the Hudson River, in the village of Hyde Park, about 6 miles north of Poughkeepsie. The property has a long history stretching back to the early colonial era, layer upon layer of ownership, each owner leaving their mark. Pierre Fauconnier received it as part of a 10,000-acre land grant from Queen Anne of England in 1705. French Huguenot, secretary to the colonial governor, a man who understood the value of land along the Hudson. Dr. John Bard bought it in 1764 and built the Red House, developing agricultural operations that would define the eastern portion of the property. His son, Dr. Samuel Bard, inherited in 1799 and constructed the first mansion on the exact site where the Vanderbilt Mansion now stands. Samuel Bard was a pioneering horticulturist. He quit his successful medical career in New York City. He had performed a life-saving operation on newly inaugurated President George Washington and moved his family to Hyde Park. There he became an innovative gentleman farmer. In 1799, he planted the ginkgo tree on the south lawn, a tree that still stands today, over 225 years later, witness to everything that follows. He planted gardens, orchards, vineyards. He experimented with cultivation of diverse European fruits in his greenhouses. The estate became famous for its botanical specimens. In 1828, Dr. David Hosack, president of the New York Horticultural Society, purchased the estate from Samuel Bard's heirs. Hosack hired André Parmentier to collaborate on landscape design, formal gardens in the French style, specimen trees from around the world, terraced lawns descending toward the river, a reputation for beauty that spread among New York's elite. This was not just a farm. This was an Eden. In 1840, John Jacob Astor, the fur and real estate tycoon, at one time the richest man in America, before the Commodore surpassed him, bought the property for his daughter Dorothea and her husband Walter Langdon. The Langdons built a Greek revival mansion in 1847 after an earlier house was lost to fire in 1845. But Walter died that same year, 1847, and Dorothea, already enchanted by life in Europe, departed for good in 1852. She gave the estate to her son, Walter Langdon Jr. Walter Jr. took over and expanded the estate to 600 acres. He added greenhouses and gardens, acquiring adjoining farmland east of the Albany Post Road in 1872. The estate's reputation grew. Visitors came from New York to admire the landscape. But Walter Jr. and his wife Catherine left no children. When Walter died in 1894, his heirs, distant relatives, put the estate on the market. They want nothing to do with maintaining such a place. Frederick and Louise Vanderbilt purchased Hyde Park in May 1895 from the Langdon heirs. The price is substantial, but not prohibitive for a man of Frederick's wealth. The location appeals for multiple reasons. First, proximity to New York City. Quick access via the New York Central Railroad, their own railroad. The family owns the line. A private station can be built on the property. No need to travel with the public. No crowds. No recognition. Privacy. Second, the Hudson Valley has become fashionable among old New York families. Livingstons have estates here, Beekmans, and now Roosevelts. The area carries social cachet without the Newport Circus. Newport is for display. The Hudson Valley is for living. Third, the property's reputation for horticulture. The previous owners had made the estate famous for its landscape, its variety of plants and trees, its specimen collections. The New York Times described it as the finest place on the Hudson between New York and Albany. For Frederick, whose passion is gardening, this is paradise. A 600-acre botanical laboratory where he can spend decades pursuing his hobby. But the Langdon Mansion itself presents problems. Frederick and Louise initially plan renovations. They want to preserve the Greek Revival structure, perhaps add wings, modernize the interiors. They consult with McKim, Mead, and White, America's top architectural firm at the time, Charles Follen. McKim himself inspects the property. He examines the foundation, the walls, the roof structure, and delivers bad news. Severe dry rot throughout. The foundation is failing. Load-bearing walls are compromised. Renovation would be more expensive than demolition and reconstruction. And even if renovated, the structure's integrity would remain questionable. His recommendation: demolish everything. Start fresh. Build a new house on the same site, incorporating the best of the old design, but with modern materials and construction techniques. Frederick and Louise agree. The Langdon House must go, and in its place, they will build something permanent, something that will last. So it begins. Ground breaks in July 1896. Charles Follen McKim takes the lead on design. McKim is at the height of his fame. He designed the Washington Square Arch, Madison Square Garden, the Boston Public Library, the Century and Metropolitan Clubs. His architectural philosophy emphasizes classical restraint, no excess, no unnecessary ornamentation, beauty through proportion, not decoration. His vision for Hyde Park, a Beaux-Arts interpretation of the Italian Renaissance, solid, permanent, grand, but not garish. This is not Newport, where his partner Stanford White designs fantastical interiors, full of color and whimsy. This is the Hudson Valley. Respectability, old money aesthetics, even for new money clients. The architectural lines of the new house echo the 1847 Langdon Mansion that preceded it. Continuity with the past. Both houses exhibit the same classical concepts: simple blocks articulated by pilasters, a semicircular portico on the river facade. But the new mansion distinguishes itself through scale and materials. Limestone exterior, 50,000 square feet of it quarried from Indiana. The same quarries that supplied the Indiana State Capitol, the Pentagon, the Empire State Building. American limestone for an American palace. The structure, both concrete and steel. Revolutionary for a residential building. Fireproof. Earthquake-resistant. Modern engineering hidden beneath classical facades. 54 rooms. Roughly 45,000 square feet of interior space. 21 fireplaces. 14 bathrooms. 25 bedrooms when you count servants' quarters. The scale is immense but not unprecedented. Frederick's brother George is building Biltmore in North Carolina at the same time. 250 rooms, 175,000 square feet. By comparison, Hyde Park is modest. The house is built on a classical Beaux-Arts plan perfected at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Symmetry, balance, hierarchy of spaces. The major public rooms on the ground floor arranged along a central axis parallel to the Hudson River. The central elliptical hall, the dining room, and the living room, all in one line. From these rooms, views of the river, Catskill Mountains in the distance, beauty framed by architecture. North and south foyers provide transitional space from the hall to the dining room and living room. Not just hallways, rooms in their own right, with high ceilings, decorative plasterwork, and furniture groupings where guests can gather. 5 secondary spaces branch off the elliptical hall: the lobby, the den, the gold room, the grand stair hall, and a lavatory. Each room has a purpose. Nothing wasted. The elliptical hall itself, the heart of the house, centers the composition. An oval room with a massive fireplace imported from a European palace, carved marble, centuries old, installed here as if it had always belonged. The ceiling soars. Light pours from windows overlooking the south lawn. This is where guests enter, where first impressions form. And the impression is clear. You are in the presence of wealth so vast it can transplant entire rooms from European palaces to American estates. The second floor contains the private quarters, bedrooms, bathrooms, dressing rooms. Mrs. Vanderbilt's suite of bedroom, boudoir, and bathroom, designed by Ogden Codman, the Boston decorator known for refined taste and restraint. Codman works for America's wealthiest families. He authored The Decoration of Houses with Edith Wharton. His aesthetic, elegant simplicity. No Victorian clutter, clean lines, expensive materials used sparingly, but perfectly. Louise's bedroom features a birthing rail around the bed, a feature from European palaces. The inner rail was for immediate family and attendants during delivery. Everyone else stayed outside the rail. But Louise and Frederick have no children. Never will. The rail is purely decorative, a European affectation installed in an American bedroom where no birth will ever occur. The irony is lost on no one who learns this detail during tours decades later. Mr. Vanderbilt's bedroom and bathroom occupy a separate wing. Privacy, even within marriage. His space is more masculine. Darker woods, simpler decoration, a place to retreat after social obligations. Guest bedrooms fill the remainder of the second floor, 6 of them, each with its own bathroom or access to nearby facilities. Luxury accommodations for weekend visitors who arrive by special train from Manhattan. The third floor, 5 additional guest bedrooms, and a servants' hall separated from the guests' rooms by a door at the main staircase. The separation is intentional. Guests should never encounter servants except during service. The staff should remain invisible until needed. Stanford White receives $50,000, equivalent to roughly $1.5 million today, to purchase articles of furniture and architectural salvage in Europe. This is White's specialty. He travels constantly, attends estate sales, befriends dealers in London, Paris, Rome. He knows where to find treasures, antique carved and painted Venetian ceilings, 15th century Flemish tapestries, Ming vases, Renaissance chairs, 16th century Florentine chess. He buys 36,000 antique Spanish tiles from estates across Spain, stone from quarries that supplied Mediterranean palaces centuries earlier, marble fireplaces from Italian villas, wood paneling from French chateaux, everything carefully documented, shipped, and installed by craftsmen who spend years on the project. McKim supervises the interiors with rare carte blanche, but at least 4 decorating firms work simultaneously on design and execution. George Glenzer handles antiques, Herder Brothers executes interior woodwork, A.H. Davenport manufactures custom furniture, and Ogden Codman designs Louise's private suite. E.F. Caldwell and Company fabricates most of the lighting fixtures, chandeliers, sconces, table lamps, all custom designed for specific rooms. The dining room ceiling is hand-carved and gilded. The craftsmanship requires months. The gold room lives up to its name. Walls covered in gold silk damask, furniture gilded, mirrors in ornate frames. Louise's sitting room receives a mural by American painter Edward Emerson Simmons, depicting Aurora and Tithonus, dawn and eternal life. But Louise hates it. Too sentimental, too obvious. She has it painted over. The mural will not be rediscovered and restored until 1962, long after both Vanderbilts are dead. Frederick's den is paneled in mahogany with vaulted ceilings, a built-in desk, and intricately carved wood panels featuring whimsical scenes of animals and cherubs. salvaged from a European chateau before being shipped to Hyde Park. The carvings are Renaissance era, irreplaceable. And here they serve as decoration in a room where Frederick reads newspapers and smokes cigars. The den has its own bathroom, unusual for the time. Frederick can relieve himself without servants knowing, privacy within privacy. A man who shrinks from human contact designs his home to minimize unavoidable interactions. The mansion's contents are bought in Europe from wealthy families who had fallen on hard times. Late 19th century Europe saw old aristocracies collapsing under debt, taxes, and social change. Their palaces emptied. Their heirlooms sold to American millionaires who craved the patina of age that money alone cannot buy, blood money in a sense. The decline of European aristocracy, financing the rise of American nouveau riches. Construction takes 3 years. Work proceeds through 1896, 1897, and 1898. The project employs hundreds of workers at peak periods: masons, carpenters, electricians, plumbers, plasterers, painters. Most are local men from Poughkeepsie and surrounding towns. Some travel from New York City for specialized work. They earn standard wages for the era. Skilled craftsmen might make $3 to $4 per day. Laborers, perhaps $2. While the mansion is being built, McKim, Mead, and White construct a temporary residence on the property, the Pavilion, completed in just a few months in 1895. Frederick and Louise live there during construction, observing progress, making decisions about finishes and fixtures. The Pavilion itself is no shack. Multiple bedrooms, full kitchen, parlors. A comfortable house by any standard, except the Vanderbilts. The cost to complete the Vanderbilt mansion, $660,000 for construction alone, equivalent to roughly $48.5 million today, adjusted for inflation. But construction is only part of the equation. Interior design and furniture expenses total $2.25 million, approximately $75 million in today's currency, nearly $3 million total for house and furnishings, at a time when the average American worker earns less than $500 per year, at a time when most Americans live in houses worth perhaps $1,500, at a time when a good wage might be $20 per week. The disparity is staggering. The mansion costs 6,000 times what an average worker earns annually. To put this in perspective, if an average American today earns $50,000 per year, an equivalent expenditure would be $300 million. And this is one of 5 houses the Vanderbilts own. April 1899. The mansion nears completion. Stand in the entrance hall and look up. Marble floors imported from Italy. Gilded ceilings with intricate plasterwork. Flemish tapestries showing hunting scenes from the 15th century. Light pouring through windows facing the Hudson, catching dust motes in the air. Magnificent. But now step past the showpiece rooms, walk through the service door, descend the servants' staircase, narrow, unadorned, built for efficiency, not beauty. And the other face appears. Behind the beauty lies infrastructure. A house of this scale is not a home. It is a machine that eats resources, coal, water, electricity, human labor. And like all machines, it requires constant feeding, or it stops functioning. Deep in the basement, boiler rooms the size of small factories burn coal, tons of it, to power the forced hot air central heating system. Industrial-scale furnaces manufactured in Pennsylvania. Cast-iron monsters that consume coal around the clock during winter months. The coal arrives by rail car, tons at a time, unloaded manually by workers who shovel it into bins. The bins feed the furnaces. The furnaces heat water that becomes steam that travels through pipes embedded in floors and walls. Coal dust in the air. Silica settling in workers' lungs. Black soot coating every surface in the boiler rooms. Men work shifts keeping the furnaces fed. The steam pressure regulated. The system functioning. Their lungs blacken, Their life expectancy shortens, but the mansion stays warm. The house features all the latest innovations when completed in 1899: central heating, indoor plumbing, electric lighting. These innovations represent modernity, progress, the triumph of technology over nature. But these innovations require labor to maintain, constant attention, eternal vigilance. The electricity comes from a hydroelectric plant built on the estate on Crum Elbow Creek, a stream that runs through the property. McKim, Mead, and White design it. Engineers from General Electric install the turbines and generators. Thomas Edison himself may have consulted on the design. Some local sources claim this, though documentation is scarce. What is certain? The plant provides electricity to the mansion a full decade before other homes in the town of Hyde Park have electric service. The plant requires operators, maintenance, repair. Someone must monitor water levels in the creek, adjust the turbines when flow changes seasonally, replace worn parts, keep the system running. The water system, man-made reservoir supplied by creek water, filtered through sand and gravel, pumped to a holding tank on high ground, then fed by gravity to the mansion. Plumbing throughout. 14 bathrooms. Indoor toilets manufactured by Crane Company in Chicago. Bathtubs with hot running water. Cold from the reservoir, heated by boilers in the basement. Sinks with running water in every bedroom. Laundry facilities capable of handling the linens from 21 fireplaces. 54 rooms. Constant use. The kitchen, industrial scale. A room 40 feet long and 20 feet wide. Walk-in ice boxes lined with zinc. Before modern refrigeration, ice is cut from the Hudson River in winter and stored in insulated ice houses. Workers haul blocks, weighing 100 pounds each. The ice melts slowly throughout summer, keeping food cold. Commercial ovens manufactured by Wolf. Cast iron ranges. Copper pots hanging from ceiling racks. Storage rooms for dry goods, pantries for china and crystal, a dedicated room for washing dishes, another for polishing silver. The staff of cooks, assistants, scullery workers preparing meals for family, guests, and the servants themselves. Breakfast for 20 people, lunch for 15, dinner for 30 when guests visit, plus meals for 60 staff members. That's over 100 meals per day when the house is fully occupied. Supplies arriving constantly. Meat from the estate's own farm supplemented by deliveries from butchers in Poughkeepsie, vegetables from the estate gardens, and greenhouses supplemented by produce from local farms. Dairy products from the estate dairy, flour and sugar and coffee, shipped from New York City warehouses. The logistics alone require a staff member dedicated solely to ordering and inventory. Service staircases, narrow and unadorned, hidden from guests, staff corridors behind walls, connecting all major rooms so servants can move unseen. This parallel world was designed to remain out of sight. The architects spent as much time planning servant circulation as guest circulation, maybe more. Because the illusion of effortless luxury depends entirely on invisible labor. Servants move along these arteries before dawn. Light fires in 21 fireplaces, prepare breakfast, set tables, polish silver, sweep floors, empty chamber pots before modern plumbing is installed in earlier years, then clean bathrooms after, draw baths, lay out clothes, everything ready before the family wakes. When the Vanderbilts are in residence, spring and early fall, just a few weeks each year, the estate employs 60 full-time staff, 60 people. Most are local residents from the village of Hyde Park. They walk or bicycle to the estate each morning. Some live in servants' quarters on the 3rd floor or in cottages on the property. They work 6 days per week, often 6.5. 12-hour days are standard. Wages range from $15 to $30 per month for maids and gardeners, up to $60 per month for specialized positions like the head gardener or butler. Compare those wages to the monthly operating costs, tens of thousands of dollars when the house is occupied. Coal alone might cost $500 per month in winter. Electricity, even self-generated, requires maintenance and repairs costing hundreds. Food for family, guests, and staff, hundreds more. Replacement of linens, china, furnishings, thousands annually. Property taxes on 600 acres, thousands. Insurance on the house and contents, thousands. Conservative estimate. The monthly operating costs when the family is in residence exceed $8,000 to $10,000. In an era when the average American worker earns $400 per year, the mansion consumes in 1 month what 20 workers earn in a year. When the Vanderbilts are not in residence, most of the year, a skeleton staff remains. 20 to 30 people, depending on the season. Maintaining, cleaning, protecting. An empty house with fires burning in winter to prevent pipes from freezing. Gardens tended year-round because neglect means losing specimens that took decades to cultivate. The farm operations never stop. Cows need milking, chickens need feeding, crops need planting and harvesting. Even when empty, Hyde Park costs thousands per month to maintain. Frederick rebuilt the farm complex soon after purchasing the estate. Modern barns, milking parlors with the latest equipment, chicken coops designed for maximum production. He strove to operate it efficiently, consulting agricultural journals, implementing scientific farming methods. The farm won awards at county fairs. But it never turned a profit. How could it? The investment was massive. The returns were agricultural commodities in an era of low food prices. But Frederick didn't build the farm for profit. He built it because a gentleman's estate required a working farm, status, tradition, and because he genuinely loved horticulture. The farm was an extension of the gardens, which were an extension of his personality, control, order, beauty maintained through constant effort. The Vanderbilts retained the overall organization of the landscape dating back to André Parmentier's 1828 design, the farm park division, the location of formal gardens, specimen plantings. In 1905, Frederick acquired the 64-acre Sexton tract to the north, including Bard Rock, re-establishing the extent of the park as it existed under Bard and Hosack ownership. All the remaining Sexton buildings were removed except for the boathouse, and the main drive was restored to the alignment Parmentier had designed 70 years earlier. Continuity with the past. Respect for earlier designers' visions. Frederick understood that he was a custodian, not a creator. The landscape predated him, would outlast him. His role was to maintain, improve, preserve. The Italian gardens, separated from the house by a formal pathway, incorporate elements typical of Italian Renaissance design. Parterres arranged in mirror symmetry, multiple levels determined by plant height, stone balustrades and statuary, fountains with classical figures. These gardens alone require 4 full-time gardeners year-round. Frederick adds a rose garden containing nearly 2,000 traditional rose bushes, plus climbing varieties on trellises. Peak bloom in June transforms the garden into an ocean of color and scent. Louise hosts garden parties here. Guests stroll gravel paths. Servants circulate with champagne and canapes. The scent of roses fills the air. But maintaining 2,000 rose bushes requires endless labor. Pruning, fertilizing, pest control, deadheading, watering during dry spells, covering in winter. The roses are beautiful. They are also a massive ongoing expense in labor and materials. The estate is, in many ways, self-sustaining, providing food and flowers for the family's needs here and at their other homes, milk and butter from the dairy, eggs from the chickens, vegetables from the kitchen garden, beef and pork from livestock raised on the farm, flowers cut daily from the greenhouses and gardens. But self-sustaining is a relative term. The infrastructure to achieve self-sufficiency costs more than simply buying goods in the market. The hydroelectric plant costs more to build and maintain than paying for commercial electricity. The farm costs more to operate than buying food from wholesalers. The justification is not economic. It's ideological. A grand estate must be self-sufficient, must produce its own resources, must demonstrate mastery over nature. Records from the era suggest the monthly costs when the family is in residence could swallow what a working family earned in a year. Every month, for a house occupied a few weeks annually. The payroll ledgers survive in archives, names written in careful script, weekly wages noted in columns. Their names survive, these workers. Some of them. Michael O'Brien, head gardener, 48, arrived from Ireland in 1882. $30 per month plus cottage. He will work at Hyde Park for 26 years until his death in 1925. Anna Schultz, head cook, 36, German immigrant, $25 per month plus room and board. She supervises the kitchen staff, plans menus, orders supplies. James Wilson, butler, 52, trained in English service, $60 per month, the highest wage on staff. He oversees the footman, maintains the wine cellar, coordinates service for dinner parties. Margaret Kelly, lady's maid to Louise, 32, $20 per month plus travel with the family. She dresses Louise, styles her hair, maintains her wardrobe, packs for trips to Newport and the Adirondacks. Thomas Reed, electrician, 40, maintains the hydroelectric plant and all electrical systems, $35 per month plus cottage. These are the lucky ones, the ones whose names appear in records, the ones who held positions long enough to be remembered. Below them, dozens more whose names are lost, scullery maids who lasted 6 months before the work broke. Them, gardeners who came for seasonal work and departed, day laborers hired for special projects, and below them, invisible entirely, the workers who built the mansion. Hundreds of men whose names appear only in construction payroll ledgers, if at all. Masons who laid the limestone, carpenters who installed the mahogany paneling, electricians who wired the house, plumbers who installed the pipes. Some were injured. Construction in 1896-1899 had few safety regulations. Men fell from scaffolding, were crushed by falling materials, lost fingers to saws, burned by chemicals. Most injuries went unrecorded. Workers were replaced. Work continued. Were there deaths during construction? Records are incomplete. But given the scale of the project, the 3-year duration, the hundreds of workers, the primitive safety conditions, almost certainly yes. At least one or two. Their names lost. Their families compensated, if at all, with a few dollars and a condolence note. The mansion cost $3 million to build and furnish, but that's only the financial cost. The human cost, the injuries, the shortened lifespans from coal dust and silica, the backs bent by carrying limestone, the lungs scarred by chemical exposure, cannot be calculated, cannot be entered in ledgers, cannot be paid in wages. The beauty is real. The cost is real. Both exist simultaneously, and anyone who tours Hyde Park today should understand. Every marble floor was laid by hands that ached at day's end. Every tapestry was hung by men on ladders who hoped not to fall. Every garden was planted by workers who earned in a year what the Vanderbilts spent on a weekend party. Who paid for Hyde Park? Everyone except the people whose names appear on the deed. Mid-April 1899. The local paper, the Hyde Park Register, notes that Mr. and Mrs. Vanderbilt will shortly take up their residence in the handsome mansion. The phrasing is cautious, respectful. The Vanderbilts are by far the wealthiest family in the area. The newspaper depends on their goodwill. Advertisements from local businesses that supply the estate. No editor will risk offense. May 14, 1899. Mr. and Mrs. F.W. Vanderbilt entertained a large party of guests who came by special train at their mansion on Friday last. Most likely this is the Vanderbilts' first house party at Hyde Park. a housewarming, a debut. Guests arrive from Manhattan on a special train. The Vanderbilts chartered an entire car, perhaps an entire train. No mixing with ordinary passengers. The train stops at the private station on the estate. Guests disembark directly onto Vanderbilt property. Frederick greets them awkwardly, Louise warmly. Servants attend. Luggage is carried to guest rooms. The weekend begins. Meals prepared by the kitchen staff. 5 courses at dinner: soup, fish, meat, salad, dessert. Different wines with each course. Silver service. Crystal glasses. Porcelain plates hand-painted with the Vanderbilt crest. After dinner, the men retire to Frederick's den for cigars and brandy. The women gather in Louise's gold room for cordials and conversation. Saturday brings activities: horseback riding through the estate's paths, tennis on the private court, a tour of the gardens with Frederick as guide, pointing out specimen trees, explaining horticultural techniques. Guests feign interest, though most care little about grafting methods or soil composition. They are here for social positioning, to be seen at a Vanderbilt estate, to move in circles where such invitations are currency. Saturday evening, another elaborate dinner, followed by dancing in the elliptical hall. An orchestra brought from New York performs. Couples waltz on marble floors under chandeliers lit by Edison's hydroelectric plant. Outside, the Hudson River reflects moonlight. Inside, wealth performs itself to an audience of itself. Sunday morning, breakfast in the dining room. Then the guests depart on the special train back to Manhattan. The weekend cost Frederick thousands of dollars in food, wine, staff overtime, orchestra fees, and incidental expenses. For what? To show the house, to fulfill social obligations, to prove that he, quiet Frederick, third son, awkward Frederick, belongs among the American elite. The house is magnificent, and it is also a machine that eats resources faster than most Americans can earn them. By all accounts, Frederick prefers quiet. Avoids social occasions when possible. But Louise loves to entertain. She is social, philanthropic, gracious. She throws lavish weekend parties throughout the years, horseback riding, golf added later when a course is built on the property, tennis, swimming in the indoor pool, followed by formal dinners and dancing, orchestras brought from the city, menus printed on heavy cardstock, wine cellars stocked with vintages from France, silver service imported from England. Louise's guest lists include names from the Social Register: Astors, Livingstons, Roosevelts, Delanos, old New York families who initially looked down on the Vanderbilts as railroad nouveau riche, but who eventually accepted them. Money opens doors that breeding once kept locked. Enough money, persistently deployed over enough years, eventually grants admission. But underneath the gaiety, a question forms. Unspoken at first, barely acknowledged. How long can this last? 1899 to 1914. The house at its height. Spring and fall, Frederick and Louise arrive from Manhattan or Newport or the Adirondacks or later from Bar Harbor. They occupy the mansion for weeks at a time, sometimes just 2 weeks, sometimes 6, never more than 3 months total per year. Guests come and go. The 60-person staff operates at full capacity. Gardens reach peak bloom in June, then again in September. The greenhouses produce year-round orchids, roses, exotic plants that cannot survive Hudson Valley winters. The farm supplies eggs, milk, vegetables, meat. The estate runs like a clockwork mechanism, every cog turning in. Synchronization. Louise's generosity toward the village of Hyde Park becomes legendary. She is everything Frederick is not: outgoing, warm, attentive to people beyond her social circle. She provides educational opportunities and entertainments for young men and women in the village. Establishes a reading room attached to St. James's Chapel, books donated from her personal library, newspapers subscribed in perpetuity. Sponsors lectures at the town hall on topics ranging from horticulture to world affairs. establishes a young men's clubroom in the village, a place where working-class men can gather, read, play cards, escape crowded tenements. She brings the Red Cross to Hyde Park in 1911, establishing a local chapter that will serve the community for decades. In 1917, she establishes the District Health Nurse, a visiting nurse program that provides medical care to families who cannot afford doctors. During World War I, when young men from Hyde Park enlist and depart for Europe, Louise joins wealthy neighbors to equip, clothe, and arm a Hyde Park home defense company of 65 men. Uniforms, rifles, training. She pays for it all. Employees report that Louise knows almost every family in Hyde Park, over 700 residents, and she can recite their names, their children's names, their circumstances. Through her agents, servants who report back to her, she often helps families struggling with health or financial difficulties. A widow whose husband died in a mill accident receives monthly payments that continue for years. A family whose home burns receives money to rebuild. Children who show academic promise receive scholarships to continue education beyond public school. Is this charity or conscience? Both, perhaps. Louise was raised Presbyterian. The faith emphasizes stewardship. The wealthy have obligations to those less fortunate. But there's also something personal in Louise's generosity. She has no children. The village becomes, in some sense, her extended family. She provides entertainments for village residents and their children. Ice cream festivals in summer, where hundreds gather on the south lawn, served by mansion staff using the same silver service used for Vanderbilt dinner parties. Christmas gifts for children delivered personally, Louise learning each child's name and age, selecting gifts accordingly. On one famous occasion in 1908, she charters a steamboat and takes all 700 residents of the village on a cruise down the Hudson River. A full day. Meals provided, music, games for children. Adults marvel at the sight of mansions along the river, pointing out estates belonging to families whose names they know from newspapers. At her Newport home, Rough Point, Louise sponsors an annual Thanksgiving dinner for newsboys and messenger boys from 1891 to 1925, 34 consecutive years. Usually 350 to 400 boys attend, entering the hall to orchestra music, tables laden with turkey, stuffing, potatoes, pies. These boys, most of them poor, some of them orphans, sleeping in tenements or on the streets, eating a meal in a palace. The contrast could not be starker. Louise sometimes attends herself, moving among the tables, asking the boys about their lives, their hopes. Some cry. Most are simply stunned. After dinner, each boy receives a small gift, a new cap, gloves, a scarf, something warm for winter. Frederick, meanwhile, remains shy, reclusive. He attends social events when Louise insists, but he clearly suffers through them. He works on the estate's operations, reviews farm budgets, approves garden plans. He putters in the gardens personally, pruning roses, inspecting specimen trees, consulting with the head gardener about plant diseases and soil amendments. He fishes. Hyde Park has several stocked ponds. Frederick stands alone for hours, rod in hand, barely speaking, even when the head gardener appears with questions. The gardener learns to wait silently until Frederick acknowledges his presence. Sometimes this takes 20 minutes. Frederick plays the banjo, an instrument ill-suited to his temperament, but he persists, practices in his den where no one can hear, never performs for guests. The instrument is therapy, perhaps, or simply something to do with hands that are otherwise idle. He owns a series of elegant steam yachts, Vedette, Conqueror, Warrior, Virginia, which he renames Vedette after his first yacht, apparently unable to tolerate the break in nomenclature. These yachts cost fortunes to build and maintain, crews of 20 or more, fuel, docking fees, insurance. He uses them perhaps 6 weeks per year. Together, Frederick and Louise travel. Florida in winter, Europe in summer, South America for adventure, up the northeast coast visiting friends at their estates. In January 1914, Warrior, his largest yacht at 280 feet, runs aground on the Colombian coast during a Caribbean cruise. The ship hits a reef, takes on water. Frederick, Louise, their guests, the Duke and Duchess of Manchester and Lord Falconer, and their servants abandon ship in lifeboats, rescued by a passing freighter. Warrior is eventually salvaged but badly damaged. Frederick sells it, rather than paying for repairs. The incident makes newspapers. Frederick, who despises publicity, finds his name in headlines. He never buys another yacht. Hyde Park remains his favorite retreat, the only estate where he can indulge his passion for horticulture without competition or criticism. Newport is Louise's domain, social, public, exhausting. The Adirondacks are wilderness, beautiful but isolating. Bar Harbor, purchased late, never quite feels like home. Manhattan is business, railroads, boardrooms, obligations. But Hyde Park is different. Here, Frederick can be, for brief periods each year, something approaching content. Walking the gardens at dawn before staff arrive. Inspecting specimen trees planted decades ago by Samuel Bard. Standing on the south lawn watching the Hudson River catch morning light. No people, no expectations. Just man and landscape in temporary harmony. But beneath the surface, pressures gather. Financial, social, structural. The mathematics of maintaining 5 estates on income that, while vast, is not infinite. Let's talk about money, real money. Not the fantasy numbers that appear in newspapers. The actual arithmetic of maintaining the Vanderbilt lifestyle. When Cornelius Vanderbilt died in 1877, he left over $100 million. His son William Henry managed it brilliantly, doubling it to $200 million by 1885. Divided 8 ways among William's children, each inherited approximately $25 million. In 1885, before income tax, $25 million in 1885 is roughly $600 million in today's currency, adjusted for inflation. An unimaginable sum. More money than anyone could spend in a lifetime, you'd think. But wealth of this magnitude carries unique vulnerabilities. It demands constant management, diversification, reinvestment, and it attracts envy, legislation, taxation. In 1913, the United States introduces the federal income tax via the 16th Amendment. Previously, the wealthy paid minimal taxes, property taxes, tariffs. That was it. Suddenly, income itself is taxed. The rate starts low, 7% on income over $500,000. But it rises. By 1918, during World War I, the top rate hit 77% on income over $1 million. Frederick's income derives primarily from railroad dividends and directorships. Conservative estimate, $500,000 to $1 million annually in the 1910s and 1920s. In 1924, shortly after the income tax is fully implemented, Frederick is one of the 10 wealthiest taxpayers in America, paying $793,000 in taxes, equivalent to roughly $12 million today, a staggering sum to lose annually, even for a Vanderbilt. Then there are operating costs for 5 residences. Each requires staff, maintenance, property taxes, utilities. Hyde Park alone, $10,000 per month when occupied, conservatively. 4 months occupied per year, $40,000. 8 months with skeleton staff, probably $5,000 per month, another $40,000. Total, $80,000 annually just for Hyde Park. That's approximately $2.5 million today for one house. Rough Point in Newport, similar costs. The Newport season runs June through September. Full staff, parties, yachts, $80,000 to $100,000 annually. Pine Tree Point in the Adirondacks. Less expensive because it's a wilderness camp, but still staff, maintenance, boats. Perhaps $20,000 annually. The Manhattan townhouse at 10 High to 25 Fifth Avenue. Year-round occupation requires full staff. Property taxes in Manhattan are high, probably $100,000 annually or more. Sonergy at Bar Harbor, purchased in 1919, another $20,000 annually. Total operating costs for 5 estates, perhaps $300,000 per year. That's before any major repairs, before travel expenses, before charitable donations, before purchases of art or furniture or jewelry. Frederick's annual income after taxes probably leaves him with $300,000 to $400,000. After estate operating costs, perhaps $100,000 for everything else. Still an enormous sum. Still more than 99% of Americans will see in a lifetime, but not infinite and not growing. The cultural tide is shifting as well. The Gilded Age is ending. The progressive era brings calls for antitrust legislation, for labor reforms, for redistribution of wealth. Trust busting under Theodore Roosevelt breaks apart monopolies. Labor unions gain strength. Strikes become common. Public opinion turns against the robber barons. Newspapers run exposés on working conditions in factories, on child labor in coal mines, on wealth inequality. Photographs by Jacob Riis show how the other half lives: tenements, sweatshops, children with hollow eyes. The contrast with Fifth Avenue mansions becomes impossible to ignore. The Vanderbilts, once celebrated as American royalty, are increasingly seen as symbols of excess, greed, moral failure. Editorial cartoons depict them as bloated plutocrats sitting on money bags while workers starve. Preachers rail against them from pulpits. Populist politicians denounce them in speeches. Frederick's siblings build even larger mansions, accelerating the family's decline. George Washington Vanderbilt constructs Biltmore in Asheville, North Carolina, a 250-room chateau modeled on French Renaissance castles, the largest private residence in America. Cost, roughly $6 million to build and furnish. Operating costs so enormous that George struggles to maintain it even with his inheritance. Cornelius Vanderbilt II builds the Breakers in Newport, a 70-room Italian Renaissance palace. Marble imported from Italy, mosaics, gilded ceilings. Platinum leaf, used where gold is too ordinary. Cost, $7 million. The house is beautiful. It is also a financial drain that will eventually force the family to donate it to preservation societies. William Kissam Vanderbilt builds Marble House, also in Newport, $500,000 for the marble alone. Then later he builds Idle Hour on Long Island, multiple estates, multiple drains on his inheritance. Alva Vanderbilt, William Kissam's wife, throws a costume ball in 1883, before most of these mansions are built, that costs $250,000, equivalent to $6 million today, for one night. One party, 1,200 guests, costumes that cost thousands each, an orchestra of 100 musicians, food and drink in quantities that border on the obscene. The New York Times calls it a gorgeous, almost barbaric display of wealth. The family builds 40 opulent mansions and estates in less than 30 years, entertaining lavishly, competing with one another for social supremacy, spending as if the money will never end. And it doesn't end, not immediately, but it diminishes, slowly, inexorably. By the 1920s, the Vanderbilt money is no longer inexhaustible. Third-generation heirs, Frederick's generation, inherited tens of millions each. But maintaining the lifestyle their parents established costs millions annually. And the fourth generation, the great-grandchildren of the Commodore, inherit less, much less, because the pie has been divided too many times and each heir's slice shrinks. Estates go on the market. Some are demolished, stone by stone, sold for salvage. Others are converted to hotels, to apartment buildings, to institutional use. The era of private palaces is ending. The arithmetic no longer works. Income tax, operating costs, social pressure. Changing times. The mathematics conspire against permanence, and then, in 1926, disaster strikes the Hyde Park estate. Not fire, not flood, not financial collapse. Something quieter, but, for Frederick, more devastating. Louise dies. August 21st, 1926. The Hotel Ritz, Paris, Louise Holmes. Anthony Vanderbilt dies following a short illness caused by complications setting in from a slight throat infection. A minor infection. Antibiotics don't exist yet. What begins as a sore throat becomes sepsis. She is 72 years old. Frederick is 70. They had been in Paris for the summer, as was their custom, shopping, visiting galleries, dining at restaurants Frederick barely tolerates. Louise loves Paris, the elegance, the culture, the anonymity. In Paris, they are simply wealthy Americans, not Vanderbilts with all that name implies. Louise takes ill in mid-August. A doctor is summoned. He prescribes rest, but the infection worsens. Her throat swells. Fever spikes. Within days she is delirious. Frederick sits beside her bed, helpless. He has all the money in the world, and it cannot save her. She dies on August 21st. Frederick is shattered. Their marriage lasted nearly 50 years, rare in any era, but especially in their social circle where divorce and remarriage are increasingly common. They had no children. Louise was Frederick's only real companion, the only person who could draw him out of his shell, the only person who understood him. Frederick returns to the United States with Louise's body aboard the White Star liner Homeric. The shipping company, honoring the Vanderbilt name, makes special arrangements. A section of the baggage room on the lower deck is made into a chapel. Wreaths and floral arrangements surround the casket. The spiral staircase leading down to the baggage room is draped with black cloth. Crew members stand honor guard. The crossing takes 7 days. Frederick remains in his cabin most of the voyage. Meals are brought to him. He eats little, sleeps less. The other first-class passengers whisper, "Poor Mr. Vanderbilt. Lost his wife." They maintain a respectful distance. The ship docks in New York. Louise's body is transported to Staten Island. She is interred in the Vanderbilt family mausoleum at Moravian Cemetery in New Dorp, a massive marble structure built by the Commodore, large enough to accommodate dozens of family members across generations. Her name is added to the bronze plaque beside Frederick's, waiting for him. The funeral is private, family only. Frederick, always shy, retreats further into himself after Louise's death. His siblings attend, some nieces and nephews, a few close friends. But no public service, no grand memorial. Louise would not have wanted spectacle, and Frederick certainly doesn't. After the funeral, Frederick makes a decision that surprises everyone. He sells his other houses. Rough Point in Newport, sold. Pine Tree Point in the Adirondacks, sold. Sonnegy in Bar Harbor, which Louise had purchased in 1919, sold. The Manhattan townhouse at 1025 Fifth Avenue, sold. He keeps only Hyde Park, the house Louise loved second best after Newport. But Newport is social, public, exhausting. Frederick cannot bear it without her. Hyde Park is quieter, more isolated, the place where Louise was happiest outside of Newport, where she walked the gardens, where she held ice cream festivals for village children, where she was most herself. Frederick returns to Hyde Park and lives there, virtually alone, for the last 12 years of his life, a recluse, seeing only family and close friends, and those rarely. He barely speaks to the Hyde Park staff. Servants report that they might go weeks without hearing his voice. He communicates through notes left on a desk in the butler's pantry, instructions, meal preferences, maintenance requests, all in writing. He spends his days puttering in the grounds and gardens, tending the plants Louise once loved, pruning roses she planted, walking paths they walked together, standing at the overlook where they watched sunsets over the Hudson. Alone now, always alone. The mansion, once alive with parties and guests, falls silent. The 60-person staff shrinks to perhaps 20 or 25, the minimum needed to maintain the house and grounds. The ballrooms go unused. The dining room, designed for banquets of 30, now serves meals for 1. The guest bedrooms remain empty. Dust gathers on the Venetian ceilings, the Flemish tapestries, the Ming vases. Sheets cover furniture in rooms Frederick never enters. He lives on the 3rd floor, surrounded by servants who avoid him out of respect for his desire for solitude. The man who once directed 22 railroads, who once paid nearly $800,000 in annual taxes, who once owned 5 estates, now inhabits a single floor of a mansion too large for one person. What does he think about alone in those rooms? Does he regret the extravagance? Does he mourn Louise, the only person who could penetrate his isolation? Does he wonder what will happen to Hyde Park after he dies? We know he thinks about legacy, because in these final years, Frederick becomes surprisingly generous with charitable donations. He gives $3.5 million to Vanderbilt University, $1.5 million with his brothers and nephew to establish the Vanderbilt Clinic, an outpatient clinic at Columbia University, providing free medical care to the poor. $100,000 to the Red Cross War Fund during World War I. $100,000 to the YMCA. $50,000 for New York City unemployment relief during the Depression. $100,000 to the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. Contributions to building the Sloan Hospital for Women and the Anthony Home for Working Girls that Louise founded in 1913. The charitable giving accelerates after Louise's death, as if Frederick, having lost the one person who made his wealth meaningful, now seeks meaning through distribution. And in his will, Frederick leaves most of his remaining fortune to his staff. Each receives a minimum of $1,000, enough to buy a modest house at the time. Those who worked for him longer receive even more. Michael O'Brien, the head gardener who worked at Hyde Park for 26 years, receives $10,000, enough to retire comfortably. Thomas Reed, the electrician, receives $5,000. Anna Schultz, the head cook, receives $3,000, on and on through the staff list. It is an act of generosity that surprises those who knew him as withdrawn, distant, unapproachable. But perhaps Frederick understood something others did not. Perhaps he knew that the people who built his world, who maintained it, who kept the fires burning and the gardens blooming, deserved more than wages. Perhaps he understood that without them, the mansion was just limestone and mortar. Without them, beauty could not exist. Or perhaps it was simply guilt, the accumulated weight of living in luxury while others scraped by, the knowledge that his wealth came from monopolies his grandfather built, from consolidations that destroyed competition, from freight rates that squeezed farmers and small businesses. The awareness that the mansion at Hyde Park was purchased with money earned, in part, by workers who would never see the inside of such a place, except as servants, we will never know. Frederick left no diary, no letters explaining his motivations. He was as silent about his inner life as he was about everything else. Frederick William Vanderbilt dies on June 29, 1938, at age 82. Heart failure, the death certificate states. He dies in his bedroom at Hyde Park, alone, except for servants in adjacent rooms. He is buried at Vanderbilt Family Cemetery and Mausoleum in New Dorp, Staten Island, alongside Louise, together again, in death, if not fully in life. Frederick and Louise had no children. The estate, according to Frederick's will, passes to Louise's niece, Margaret Daisy Van Allen. Daisy is in her 50s. She already owns mansions in Newport and the south of France, inherited from other relatives. She wants nothing to do with the cost and hassle of running Hyde Park. 600 acres? That's still managed. A 54-room mansion? Who needs it? Staff to maintain, property taxes, repairs, operating expenses that never end. And in 1938, in the depths of the Great Depression, who has money for such things? The Depression devastated wealth in America. Stock market crash of 1929. Bank failures. Unemployment reaching 25%. Mansions across the country go on the market and stay on the market because who has the money to buy? Who has the money to operate? Daisy tries to sell Hyde Park. No buyers emerge. Not at any price. The math doesn't work for anyone except people who don't need to worry about math. And even then, why? What purpose does a palace serve in 1938? She approaches the owner of a nearby estate for advice. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR grew up at his ancestral estate, Springwood, just 2 miles south of Hyde Park. He resides there part of the year, maintaining the family home as a personal retreat from Washington. He has been an occasional guest of the Vanderbilts at Hyde Park. He knows the property. He understands its significance. And Franklin Roosevelt has an idea. The federal government, under Roosevelt's leadership, has been expanding historic preservation efforts. National parks, national monuments, national historic sites, places that tell the American story, battlefields, presidential homes, architectural treasures. Why not a Gilded Age mansion? Why not preserve one of these palaces as a monument to an era of unparalleled wealth and inequality? Let the American people see how the other 1% lived. Let them walk through marble halls. Let them climb servants' staircases. Let them understand the infrastructure of luxury. Roosevelt pitches the idea to Daisy, and to his credit, he frames it brilliantly. You'll be remembered as the woman who gave the American people a gift. Your name will be associated with generosity, with preservation, with education. Not a bad legacy. Daisy agrees. In 1940, she donates the estate and 211 acres to the National Park Service. Not sold, donated. A gift to the American people. The remaining farmland, about 400 acres, is sold separately to settle estate taxes and remains in private hands to this day. On December 18, 1940, the Vanderbilt Mansion National Historic Site is established by Act of Congress. President Roosevelt signs the legislation personally, takes a photograph with Daisy for newspapers. The symbolism is perfect. Wealthy heiress gives palace to the people. Democracy wins. The house that Frederick built for quiet now serves millions. But first, a war. 1941 to 1943. World War II erupts. The United States enters after Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Franklin Roosevelt, now in his third term as president, needs secure accommodations for staff, Secret Service, and guests near his Hyde Park home at Springwood. The Vanderbilt Mansion, now federal property, sits empty just 2 miles away. Perfect. The Secret Service occupies the service areas of the basement and the third floor, the same floor where Frederick lived out his final years. Agents sleep in former servants' quarters. They install communications equipment in what was once the butler's pantry, radios, telephones, encryption devices. The mansion becomes temporarily a secure government facility. Some of Roosevelt's personal White House staff and friends occasionally lodge in the main bedrooms when they accompany him to Hyde Park. They sleep in Frederick and Louise's suites, walk the same halls, use the same bathrooms. The mansion that once hosted weekend parties for New York's elite now houses government employees and military personnel protecting a president during wartime. Roosevelt himself never sleeps at the Vanderbilt Mansion. He prefers Springwood, but he uses the Vanderbilt Estate for walks, for drives around the grounds, for occasional meetings, away from his own home's interruptions. Secret Service agents accompany him. He wheels himself in the gardens Frederick tended, looks at the same specimen trees, sees the same Hudson River views. The irony is not lost on historians. A house built with railroad monopoly money, a palace constructed to escape the public eye, now serves the public good. The transformation is complete. After the war ends in 1945, the Secret Service departs. The National Park Service begins the work of converting the mansion into a museum, inventorying the contents, researching the history, training docents, developing tour routes, opening to the public. The first official tours begin in 1946. Visitors walk through the elliptical hall, the dining room, the living room. They ascend the grand staircase, careful not to touch the carved banister. They see Louise's bedroom with its birthing rail, and tour guides explain the irony, a feature from European palaces, installed despite the fact that Louise and Frederick had no children. They see Frederick's den with its carved wood panels salvaged from a French chateau. They see the gold room with its silk damask walls. And crucially, the tours include the servants' quarters, the narrow staircases, the small bedrooms where maids slept 2 or 3 to a room, the industrial kitchens, the boiler rooms where men shoveled coal, the infrastructure of luxury made visible. The National Park Service understands that the real story of Hyde Park is not just the beauty of the public rooms. It's the contrast between upstairs and downstairs, between what guests saw and what workers experienced, between the facade and the machinery that made the facade possible. Visitors learn. They learn about the Gilded Age, about wealth disparity, about the cost of beauty, about the workers whose labor made such estates possible. Many visitors leave thoughtful. Some leave angry. None leave unchanged. The mansion, in death, finally serves the purpose Frederick could never articulate in life: education, revelation, truth-telling. Today, the Vanderbilt Mansion National Historic Site receives thousands of visitors annually. The house remains virtually unchanged from the time the Vanderbilts lived there. The furnishings, the tapestries, the antiques, all preserved. The gardens, maintained by National Park Service employees who carry on the work Michael O'Brien started in 1899. The grounds open to the public from dawn to dusk, year-round. Walking the estate costs nothing. The grounds are free, but house tours require tickets, $10 for adults, free for children 15 and under. The tours run Thursday through Monday, weather permitting. In winter, the house sometimes closes for maintenance. Budget constraints mean fewer rangers, fewer tour times. This is the modern bargain. The operating costs Frederick once bore alone, tens of thousands monthly, now spread across millions of taxpayers. The National Park Service budget for the site runs roughly $500,000 annually. Salaries for rangers and maintenance staff, utilities, repairs, insurance, security, groundskeeping. The same endless expenses, just distributed differently. A comprehensive restoration occurred between 2015 and 2018, the first major exterior construction work since the mansion was built in 1897-1899. The firm John G. Waite Associates PLLC, architects specializing in historic preservation, conducted a comprehensive conditions survey. They found moisture leaks that had appeared as early as the 1960s despite careful maintenance. The restoration was conducted in 2 phases, costing millions. Masonry cleaning using gentle techniques that wouldn't damage the limestone. Limited repointing where mortar had failed. Window sashes removed, repaired, repainted, reinstalled, doors stripped, refinished, light fixtures and railings restored. In the first phase, which dealt with work below the water table, lightweight concrete support systems replaced severely deteriorated structural systems for the porticos. Similar lightweight concrete replaced fill under the portico steps. The foundation was excavated and waterproofing installed, something that should have been done originally but wasn't because the technology didn't exist in 1897. The second phase completed the waterproofing and restored architectural elements above the water table, all of it necessary, all of it expensive, all of it paid by taxpayers who will likely never visit. But alongside the physical restoration, JGWA completed a 9-volume historic structure report and a 3-volume comprehensive historic furnishings report, documentation, research, scholarship, so that future generations can understand not just what the mansion looks like, but what it meant, why it was built, what it cost, who paid. The ginkgo tree. Samuel Bard, planted in 1799, still stands on the south lawn, over 225 years old. The tree has witnessed Samuel Bard's horticultural experiments, Hosak's landscape designs, the Astors and Langdons, the demolition of the 1847 house, the construction of the Vanderbilt mansion, Frederick and Louise's residence, Frederick's lonely final years, Louise's death, Frederick's death, the estate's donation, World War II, the conversion to a museum, 7 decades of tourism. The tree endures. Its roots reach deep into soil that has absorbed 2 centuries of American history. Its branches spread wide, sheltering visitors who photograph it, lean against it, marvel at its age. What else survives? The formal gardens, though simplified. The rose garden Frederick planted is maintained, though with fewer varieties than the original 2,000 bushes. The National Park Service budget doesn't stretch that far. The Italian gardens remain, terraces descending toward the river. The specimen trees Frederick collected, oaks, maples, exotic imports that somehow survived Hudson Valley winters. The estate is no longer self-sustaining. The farm operation ceased when the farmland was sold in 1940. The greenhouses fell into disrepair and were demolished in the 1950s. The hydroelectric plant on Crum Elbow Creek, which provided electricity for the mansion, was decommissioned. The mansion now draws power from the commercial grid like everyone else. But the mansion itself endures. Stone and steel, marble and mahogany, beauty built to last and lasting still. Hyde Park was always considered modest by Vanderbilt standards. George's Biltmore, 250 rooms. Cornelius's Breakers, 70 rooms. William Kissam's Marble House, 50 rooms of marble and gilt. Hyde Park, 54 rooms, yes, but simpler, less opulent, more restrained. And yet Hyde Park survived where so many others did not. Marble House, donated to the Preservation Society of Newport County in 1963, now a museum. The Breakers, leased to the Preservation Society in 1948, opened as a museum, the family retaining limited private apartments. Biltmore remains in family hands, open to paying tourists in 1930 to cover operating costs, now operated as a for-profit attraction with hotel, winery, and restaurants on the grounds. Others demolished entirely. Cornelius Vanderbilt II's Fifth Avenue Mansion, demolished 1927. William Kissam Vanderbilt's Idle Hour, demolished 1941. Harold Sterling Vanderbilt's mansion in Newport, demolished 1967, on and on. 40 mansions built, perhaps 15 survive. Why did Hyde Park survive when so many others didn't? Location helped. The Hudson Valley remained desirable. Not as fashionable as Newport, perhaps, but steadily attractive. Land values stayed high. Frederick Roosevelt's intervention helped enormously. The timing of the donation, 1940, when federal historic preservation efforts were expanding, helped. But perhaps the real reason Hyde Park survived is that it was never meant to impress. Frederick built it as a retreat, a place to indulge his love of horticulture, a place to escape the expectations that came with the Vanderbilt name. He occupied it only weeks each year, yes. He spent millions to build and maintain it, yes. But he did not use it to compete with his siblings. He did not throw costume balls or build 250 rooms or install platinum leaf where gold would do. Hyde Park was in its own strange way almost modest as a 45,000 square foot mansion with 54 rooms and 60 staff members can be. And so it survived. Because it learned, eventually, to serve. Not one family, but millions. Not wealth, but history. Not exclusion, but education. Who paid for Hyde Park? Let's be precise. Let's count the actual costs, human and financial. The workers who built it. Hundreds of men whose names mostly vanish from records. Masons who laid 50,000 square feet of Indiana limestone, one block at a time. Carpenters who installed mahogany paneling. fitting pieces so precisely that joints are nearly invisible. Electricians who wired the house with technology so new that safety standards didn't exist. Plumbers who installed miles of copper pipe for the heating and water systems. These men earned $2 to $4 per day. They worked 10 to 12 hours. 6 days per week. Some worked all 3 years of construction. Most came and went as phases of work required their skills. Total man-hours for construction, perhaps 500,000 hours. At an average wage of $3 per day, that's roughly $250,000 in wages paid to workers, out of a total construction cost of $660,000. The rest went to materials, architect fees, overhead, the workers who were injured. Construction in the 1890s had no safety regulations, no workers' compensation, no unions protecting rights. Men fell from scaffolding, were crushed by falling materials, lost fingers to saws, suffered burns from chemicals used in finishes. Most injuries went unrecorded. Workers were replaced. Work continued. Were there deaths during construction? Records are incomplete. But given the scale of the project, a 54-room mansion built over 3 years, and given typical construction mortality rates of the era, almost certainly, yes. Conservative estimate, 1 to 3 deaths. Their names lost. Their families compensated, if at all, with a few dollars and a handshake. The staff who maintained it, 60 people when the Vanderbilts were in residence, 20 to 30 when they were not. Over the 43 years Frederick and Louise owned Hyde Park, 1895 to 1938, thousands of people worked there. Most for short periods, some, like Michael O'Brien, for decades. Wages totaled perhaps $100,000 annually when fully staffed. Over 43 years, $4.3 million, more than the original construction cost. The hidden price of maintaining beauty. Lives shortened by labor. Coal dust in lungs causing silicosis and early death. Servants' arthritis from scrubbing floors, carrying heavy loads, working in cold and damp conditions. Gardeners' backs bent by decades of physical labor. Kitchen staff's burns from hot stoves. Laundresses' hands scarred by lye soap. Frederick paid for it with railroad money extracted from monopolies his grandfather built. The New York Central Railroad charged freight rates and passenger fares set by one company with no competition. Farmers paid to ship grain. Merchants paid to move goods. Passengers paid to travel. And the Vanderbilt family collected dividends. Frederick's inheritance from his father in 1885, approximately $25 million. Managed well, invested in railroad stock and bonds, earning perhaps 5% annually. That's over $1 million per year in passive income, for doing nothing except owning stock. Frederick increased his inheritance over his lifetime. When he died in 1938, his estate was valued at over $70 million. He tripled his wealth in 53 years, not through invention or entrepreneurship, through prudent management of an inherited monopoly fortune. Louise paid for it with her family's dry goods fortune. Charles Lee Anthony made his money in textiles, buying fabric from mills in New England and England, selling to merchants and dressmakers in New York. The labor behind textiles, mill workers, mostly women and children, earning pennies per hour in dangerous conditions. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911, 146 garment workers burned to death because factory owners locked exit doors to prevent theft. That's the same industry that funded Louise's wealth. Less dramatic than railroads, perhaps, but still built on exploitation of labor in an era when unions were weak and regulations non-existent. And the visitors pay for it now. Taxpayers, the collective, through the National Park Service budget, through admissions fees, $10 for house tours, grounds are free, through the democratic decision that places like Hyde Park are worth preserving as historical sites. The operating costs, once borne by one family, now spread across millions. Federal budget appropriations for the National Park Service, state tourism funds, municipal support, all pooled to maintain what one family once maintained alone. The lesson is plain. Beauty by itself is not enough. Wealth by itself is not enough. To endure, a place must serve something larger than the ego of its builder. Hyde Park survived because it transformed from private palace to public museum, because it became a teaching tool, because it forces every visitor to confront questions about wealth, labor, beauty, and cost. Questions like, why does one family need 54 rooms? How is it possible to maintain 5 estates when most Americans struggle to maintain one modest home? What gives anyone the right to accumulate wealth on this scale? And what obligations come with such wealth? The National Park Service doesn't preach. The tour guides don't editorialize. They present facts. They show rooms upstairs and downstairs. They explain the hydroelectric plant, the coal-fired furnaces, the servant circulation patterns. They mention the 60-person staff. They note that the Vanderbilts occupied the house only weeks each year, and visitors draw their own conclusions. Some admire the beauty and craftsmanship. Some rage at the inequality. Most feel both simultaneously. That dissonance, that cognitive tension between admiration and anger, is precisely what makes Hyde Park valuable as a historic site. Stand on the bluff above the Hudson River, November afternoon, low sun catching limestone walls, making them glow, columns casting long shadows, terraces descending toward the water in 3 broad stages, the Catskill Mountains in the distance, purple against the sky. Beautiful. And underneath, if you look, boiler rooms in the basement, accessible now to tourists who descend narrow stairs, service corridors visible on the tour route, payroll ledgers preserved in archives, names like ghosts, Michael O'Brien, Anna Schultz, James Wilson, Margaret Kelly, Thomas Reed, the infrastructure that made beauty possible, the labor that remains invisible unless you choose to see it. How much does a dream cost? Frederick spent $3 million to build Hyde Park, equivalent to over $90 million today adjusted for inflation, or much more when calculated as a percentage of GDP. He spent $80,000 to $100,000 annually to maintain it. He occupied it only weeks each year. He died alone on the 3rd floor. A recluse in a palace, surrounded by servants who barely spoke to him and whom he barely acknowledged. Was it worth it? For Frederick? Perhaps not. The house didn't make him happy. Louise made him happy, and she would have done so in any house. The gardens made him happy, and he could have gardened on 10 acres as easily as 600. The isolation he craved could have been purchased more cheaply. But the question of worth extends beyond Frederick's personal satisfaction. The house survived because it learned to serve, because Roosevelt convinced a reluctant heiress to donate it rather than demolish it, because the National Park Service saw value in preserving a monument to an era of unparalleled wealth and inequality, because millions of visitors since 1940 have walked through those rooms and learned something about American history, about the Gilded Age, about the true cost of beauty. Every year, thousands of students visit on school field trips. They walk through the mansion. They see the contrast between the gold room where guests sipped champagne and the boiler room where workers shoveled coal. Their teachers explain, this is what the Gilded Age looked like. This is wealth inequality made visible. This is American history, not the sanitized version, but the complicated truth. Those students leave with questions. Why did they need so many rooms? Where did the money come from? Who built this? How did the servants live? What happened to all the other mansions like this one? Those questions matter. Those questions change how young people think about wealth, labor, power, responsibility. Hyde Park, in serving as a museum, serves democracy. It makes visible what the Gilded Age tried to keep hidden: the infrastructure of luxury, the human cost, the mathematics that never quite balanced. The beauty is real. The cost is real. Both exist simultaneously, eternally, in tension, and the accounting never ends. Every visitor who tours the mansion becomes part of the equation. Every dollar spent on restoration, the recent exterior work costs millions, comes from collective resources. Every child who walks those grounds and asks, why did they need so many bathrooms? Every adult who stands in the servants' quarters and realizes how small those spaces were, how narrow those staircases, how different the world below was from the world above. Hyde Park endures because it tells the truth. Not the gilded version, not the fairy tale of robber barons as heroes. The truth about what it took to build a palace. The truth about who paid. The truth about what happens when a family tries to buy permanence with money and discovers that nothing lasts except the lessons we draw from what came before. Frederick Vanderbilt was the only one of his generation to increase his inheritance to a sizable fortune. He was prudent where his siblings were profligate. He avoided publicity where they sought it. He built 5 estates, but preferred 1. And when he died, he gave his money to the people who had served him. His will distributed hundreds of thousands of dollars to staff members, an act of generosity that partly redeems, though does not erase, the years of enormous wealth disparity. Perhaps he understood better than most of his family that wealth is temporary, that beauty requires maintenance, that nothing lasts without transformation, that the house which served his desire for isolation would only survive by serving the opposite: education, revelation, public access. The mansion stands. Visitors come from across the country, across the world. They photograph the limestone facade. They marvel at the elliptical hall. They climb the grand staircase carefully, reverently. They read plaques explaining the Vanderbilt family's rise and fall. They walk the grounds where Frederick once walked alone. The ginkgo tree grows, adding rings year by year, now 226 years old. The Hudson flows, as it has for millennia, indifferent to the human dramas played out on its banks. Seasons change. Winter snows cover the terraces. Spring brings blooms to the gardens. Summer heat draws crowds who picnic on the lawn. Fall colors the specimen trees in shades Frederick would recognize. And the story continues. Not as a celebration of wealth, but as a reckoning with it. Not as a monument to one family, but as a mirror. For a nation that still wrestles with questions of wealth, labor, and what we owe to one another. The Gilded Age ended. The robber barons died. The 40 mansions crumbled or transformed. But the questions remain. How much wealth is too much? What obligations come with fortune? Who really pays when palaces are built? Can beauty justify the cost? Hyde Park doesn't answer these questions. It poses them. Every tour, every visit, every photograph taken by a tourist who will never own anything remotely comparable. And in posing them, the mansion fulfills its final purpose, not as Frederick's retreat, not as Louise's stage for charity, but as America's mirror, showing us who we were, asking us who we want to be. How much does a dream cost? More than money, more than limestone and marble, more than $3 million or $90 million adjusted for inflation. It costs vision, sacrifice, adaptation, and the humility to let great things live by learning to serve. Frederick spent a fortune building a palace. America spent decades learning to see past the palace to the people who made it possible. The workers whose names survive in ledgers. The servants who kept the machine running. The taxpayers who now maintain what private wealth created. The house survived because enough people believed it should. Because preservation mattered more than profit. Because teaching mattered more than demolition. Because the story, the whole story, upstairs and downstairs, was worth telling. Stand on the bluff one last time. Look at the limestone walls glowing in late afternoon light. Listen to the silence. Feel the weight of history and understand. This house is beautiful. This house cost everything. And this house endures not because one family was wealthy enough to build it, but because a nation was wise enough to preserve it. Not as a monument to wealth, but as a memorial to everyone who paid the real price. The lesson survives. The questions survive. The accounting continues. And we are all part of it now.